Kristen, Jake, shall we get started?
Sure, let's get started, yes.
All right. So you've all escaped me singing for you for today at least, but welcome everybody. We are so excited. Thank you so much for joining us here today for our Lunch and Learn session on DV and families. I'm Nicole Molinaro, very proud and humbled to be the president and CEO for Women's Center and Shelter of Greater Pittsburgh. And we're just so happy once again to see so many people joining us for the second session of our 4-part Domestic Violence and series, this one on the topic of domestic violence and families. Family is the absolute bedrock upon which we build our lives. When domestic violence shakes that foundation, it reverberates to every corner, impacting survivors, survivors' children, their relationship with their parents and siblings, and yes, even their pets. When domestic violence programs started near a half a century ago, it quickly became apparent that providing safety and support for survivors meant also extending the same standard of care and concern to those they loved most. Today, this understanding informs Women's Center's approach to the programs we offer, how we provide our services, and even in the design of our shelter and office space. Today's installment of the DV and series is in loving memory of Ted and Sherley Craig. Shirley, who was a friend to the Women's Center and Shelter for many, many years, passed away very recently on September 7th, 2020. She was the beloved wife of the late Ted Craig, and she is survived by her 3 daughters, Lucy, Cindy, and Karen, all of whom are here with us today, and several grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Shirley truly valued her family, and she said that they brought her the greatest joy of her life. Shirley and Ted were both strong and vocal supporters of the important work of Women's Center and Shelter of Greater Pittsburgh. Their advocacy started when Ted was a partner at K&L Gates and was contacted by 2 female associates, one of whom was Rachel Lori Allen, whom many of you know is a longtime board member, about the Women's Center and Shelter work and needs. Through the years and after Ted's death, the backing increased and included, among others, the establishment of the Ted Craig Humanitarian Award that is presented annually at our event celebrating survivors. It included participation in our capital campaign and the creation of a pet area, as well as assistance with meal donations and just really so many of our needs. Shirley made a point to talk about her dedication to Women's Center and Shelter and to personally attend events and invite guests in order to promote our crucial work. She would send her friends articles and newspaper clippings for their information and to ensure that she knew she felt this cause was extremely worthwhile. Her daughters and family also understand the significance and value of Women's Center and Shelter to the community, and they will continue in their parents' footsteps to provide their time and resources and to uphold the family commitment that their parents began many, many years ago. Shirley's family greatly thanks those who have generously recognized the shelter in her memory. Shirley lived her life caring about others. She was warm-hearted, she was sweet, and she was compassionate. She would unselfishly look for ways to make those around her feel loved and valued on a daily basis. She made a lasting impact on her lives and those she knew, and that includes me. I just absolutely adored Shirley. Shirley was quite simply amazing, and she will be greatly missed. It's now my pleasure to introduce today's presenters, Carla, our Director of Programs, and Sabrina, our Legal Director. If you have questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat, and our moderator, Kristen, will pass them along during the Q&A period at the end. Finally, before we begin, please know that some of this information may be triggering. Please do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself. Without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Carla.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hello. I am so happy to join you this afternoon to share information about domestic violence and families, along with a few of the services and programs available to all of our clients. Within this brief time, I will provide an understanding of how abuse can affect and disrupt the structure of a family. I would like to begin by reading this meaningful quote. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes courage is the quiet voice at the end of the day, saying, I will try again tomorrow. I believe this quote truly represents the women and children who are courageous enough to leave or to seek help from an abusive relationship. Seeking help can merely mean a call into our hotline or accessing our text chat line for emotional support, safety planning, or information about entering our emergency shelter. We are aware at Women's Center that taking this first step to call or text or making the decision to enter the shelter can be overwhelming, stressful, and very, very scary for both the women and the children. Leaving an abusive relationship is the most dangerous time for a woman. Also, it can take a woman up to 7 times before she actually leaves her abuser. When a woman makes the difficult decision to enter shelter, this is an opportunity for her and her children to begin the healing process. But she will also be faced, and the children will be faced, with the process of leaving other family members, leaving friends, leaving a community for a new community. Also finding safe and affordable housing, finding employment, and breaking down the many, many barriers that may come her way. Can I have the next slide, Jake? Women's Center and Shelter uses the sanctuary model throughout the organization, which is a blueprint for providing trauma-informed care to all of our victims of abuse. The sanctuary model has been adopted throughout our agency as a holistic approach to meeting the physical and emotional needs of survivors of abuse. The sanctuary model consists of 7 commitments that every single one of us are committed to in the agency to practicing these commitments. I'm going to share them with you. They are a commitment to nonviolence, a commitment to emotional intelligence, a commitment to social learning, a commitment to shared governance, a commitment to open communication, a commitment to social responsibility, and last but not least, a commitment to growth and change. Next slide, please, Jake. Our emergency shelter, we provide for our women and our children, including boys up to age 17. Women and children can be admitted into our 24-hour shelter by calling our 24-hour hotline, which the number is here, 412-687-8005. Our women can also reach us through our text and chat line that I mentioned earlier, which we're very proud to have implemented back in May. So excited. So they can reach us by merely a text message. And that number is here, 412-744-8445. Also by going right to our website, WC&ScanHelp.org, and simply click on that bubble that says chat for help. Next slide, Jake. Just a few of our programs and services for our residential adult clients. We provide advocate support with locating safe and affordable housing. While staying in the emergency shelter, our advocates provide safety planning, education, emotional support, crisis intervention, and goal planning to help our survivors begin to rebuild their lives. There's also clinical support from our amazing therapists that provide individual sessions and also group sessions. Next slide. Also, a weekly medical clinic comes in for our women and children, including health assessments and referrals for healthcare in our community. Assistance with connecting to supportive services in the community, including healthcare, welfare, Social Security benefits, and childcare. Also meeting with our legal advocacy department. With Sabrina, we'll bring you a wealth of information regarding our legal department very shortly. Also referrals to therapy options designed to aid women or children in the process of healing from trauma. Continuing with some more services, recovery support and referrals to medical treatment programs, career and education, advocacy to help residents explore school and work opportunities. Our child, youth, and family advocates who support and work with our residents and non-residents as well within the CYF system. Next slide. We also have our wellness team. Our wellness team includes our clinical supervisor, our trauma therapist, and children's counselor. These three clinicians, licensed clinicians, provided in-person counseling sessions, teletherapy, support groups for all of our residents and non-residential clients. Our children's program, currently we have 4 full-time awesome advocates who help the children explore their feelings and provide a wide variety of nurturing activities and services. This is while to give our moms the time to go out and look for housing, to go out and find employment, and attend groups and any other needs to rebuild their lives. Each year, 1 in 4, can you go back, Jake? Each year, 1 in 15 children in the United States is exposed to intimate partner violence. Domestic violence is among the leading causes of homelessness in children, unfortunately. WC&S is committed to providing help to children witnesses of domestic violence from birth all the way through age 18. Our children's staff and our children's program provide the best help for our children, and they are also, our children are survivors. Next slide. The children's program and services, academic support, that looks like tutoring, reading programs, on-site before and after school programming, emotional support, daily check-in about feelings, and workshops that include writing and musical therapy. Interpersonal and social support, which looks like ongoing events with partners, organizations such as Carnegie Museum, the Zoo, Beverly's Birthdays, and also there are activities that recognize and celebrate cultural diversity, because we do serve all cultures, and we are proud to say we are adamant about diversity at Women's Center and Shelter. Advocacy referrals, school advocacy and facilitation of school enrollment and transportation for the moms and the children, and on-site access to a pediatrician and a dentist. Okay, Jake. And last but not least, our wonderful pet shelter, which we are so proud to have. It has really been helpful and a part of the healing process for the families to have their pets on site with them. Our pets are our family. I know, I loved my pet. I think most of them at Women's Center and Shelter do have pets, and we love them so much. A statistic though, that 50% of domestic violence survivors delay their leaving an abusive relationship out of the fear for their pets. At Women's Center and Shelter, we have housed cats, dogs, fish, snakes, rats. I think we had a bird. I think we had a bunny. So any pet is welcome at Women's Center and Shelter with our children and our families. And as I end, I want to thank you for listening, for your appreciation of this and taking your time. And I want to end with this quote. Survivors of abuse show us the strength of their personal spirit every time they smile. And when I'm up in shelter, I do see a lot of smiles. Thank you very much for your time. On to Sabrina.
Great. Thanks, Carla, so much. I think that was really informative. And just to confirm, we did have bunnies and a snake, and the snake was the hardest time for me. I had to tiptoe through the building for my own well-being. But you are right. We do accept. We do accept. I don't care what size it was, Nicole.
It was this big.
No, don't tell me that.
It was,
you know what?
it was adorable.
No, it was big. It was big.
It was that's large. That's an extra large size snake. So the point being that we do clearly accept all kinds of pets, and that's an amazing resource that I think we provide to survivors and really makes our services unique. So, okay, so just a little bit about our legal department. Our legal department is housed off of the main buildings area downtown, primarily because we need to get back and forth to court pretty regularly. And our department is divided into two sections. So the first is the legal advocacy department. And this is an amazing group of non-attorney advocates whose primary role is to offer legal options counseling to survivors of domestic violence and to support them as they enter into the court system, which is an extremely scary and overwhelming process. So having someone there sort of silently standing next to you as you go through that process and connecting you to the resources that will help you make it through that process is a tremendous benefit for anybody who is leaving a violent relationship. Advocates also try to work to improve the justice system's response to DV and provide training. So that means educating the court, whether it be in the individual case that they're working on, or as they do systematic trainings or writing letters or reaching out with phone calls to different systems. So our advocates are very busy and they are very essential to survivors' healing as they go through the court process. You could do the next slide. The second side of our legal department is our civil law project. So back in 2000, our statewide agency, PCADV, recognized that there was a need for representation of survivors as they went through cases in the civil areas, primarily in the area of family division. And this was an amazing project where 13 programs were set up across the state, including ours. And over time, we have grown, along with the assistance of our Chief Legal Officer, Lorraine Bittner, to include several more attorneys than when we started, and paralegals. And in addition to the work that we were originally doing, we have now taken on cases that address sexual assault and that address limited English speaking refugee and immigrant folks. So we have expanded our services, and each year we are handling about 600 new cases for survivors of violence. Similarly to the legal advocates, we are working to improve the response of the justice system and provide trainings to folks within that system, including training attorneys to handle PFA cases, with those attorneys not usually handling those cases, which is a tremendous help to the court and to survivors. So you could do the next slide. So just as a reference, Pennsylvania has its own protection from abuse statute. It was created passed in 1976. It was one of the first in the country. Now all 50 states do have protective statutes in place. The purpose of the statute is to stop abuse before it gets worse. And so, as you heard Carla said, leaving is a process. And so oftentimes when families head down to file for protection in the court, it's not the most serious event of abuse that's happened to them. It's oftentimes maybe not physical, but the statute itself covers that type of ongoing abuse and offers protective relief to those survivors of violence. We do have a very collaborative process in Allegheny County. That process includes much work with the PFA unit, the 4 domestic violence agencies, our law project, neighborhood legal services, and pro bono attorneys. And without all those people doing the work that they do, we would not be able to meet the needs of the survivors in our county. So they're all essential to that work. If I could have the next slide. So we know this, there's no such thing as a typical victim. And because of that, we also know that domestic violence is not the only issue that our survivors are facing, right? They face a variety of things, their families would face a variety of things, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But we service victims from all ethnicities, socioeconomic statuses, genders, sexual orientation, folks who work inside the home and work outside the home. And with each of those families come individual needs that we're trying to resolve through the court system and through court relief. Sorry, next slide. I should have like a little, what do you do like for the next slide? So, so domestic violence survivors and safety planning. Safety planning is a key essential tool to keeping survivors safe. And safety planning can look like a variety of different things. You know, if you have children and you're taking them to school, do you go the same way to school in the morning each day? Do you have a light on outside your house? Do you have cameras? Do you have a friend whose number is easily and readily accessible to call if there's an emergency? You know, different complexities of families require different types of safety planning, but this is the core, I believe, of the work that our legal department does to keep victims and survivors safe from ongoing abuse. And we spend a lot of time working with survivors to come up with individual safety plans that work for their family as they move forward. Next slide, please. So under the PFA Act and in a PFA petition and order, folks who qualify for the relief, which means they have a certain type of relationship and a specific type of abuse, can receive a variety of types of available relief, which may include everything from all of that you see listed there to some of that. It's important, I think, to think about a PFA as a menu that offers relief that is specific to each family's need. And so a lot of our clients that we work with come in thinking they either need a PFA or they don't get a PFA, and there's nothing in the middle. But for folks that are looking for protective relief, there's a lot of different types of options that would work for their family, and we can pick and choose what we ask the court to consider in those cases. So I think it's important for folks to know that. Next slide. So, you know, this is probably more in the weeds, but this is just how you can obtain a PFA order in Allegheny County. What's most important, I think, to know is that families can get relief at 3 different levels, right? So there's an emergency PFA, which is a PFA that lasts until the end of the next business day. There's a temporary PFA, which can last up to 10 days. And then there's a final PFA, which can last up to 3 years. And so it is, again, not just that you show up at one point in this process. There's a lot of doors that a survivor can come in to get the relief that they need in a PFA. And we know that the PFA is sort of one tool in their toolbox of safety, but it's an important and effective tool. We know that the protective relief in PFAs keep victims safe as they continue to separate from their abusive relationships. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the artistic portion of my presentation. So this is a picture of the courthouse, the family division downtown. This is where you file for a temporary PFA and have a final PFA hearing. Some folks never have to see this courthouse, but if you do, it looks like an old castle, and it's actually a very beautiful building. But to give folks some reference of where these kinds of cases take place, I included this photo, and then the next 2 photos, which are what the PFA unit looks like. So this is a place where PFA plaintiffs can review petitions and do safety planning with legal advocates. And what is really unique about this is several years ago, many collaborative partners came together with funding through the county and through private resources to create this space as a model space across the state and the country for PFA filings. And you can see here, there's a reflective glass. What's on the other side of that glass is a children's room. And so, you know, for many folks who come down to file for PFAs, they have to bring their children with them because they don't have access to childcare, they don't have the resources to allow them to stay at home. And it's really difficult, particularly if the incident happened the night before and the children witness that, to be away from that parent. So the court has set up a system where your children can wait in a waiting room and see you through the glass as you fill out that paperwork, but they don't hear what you're talking about when you're talking to the advocates, which is extremely important, both to the plaintiff and to keep children you know, not in the middle of all of that very confidential and detailed information. If you want to switch to the next slide. And this is the area that attorneys meet with plaintiffs at final hearings. Again, the purpose of this area was to show that there's, confidential spaces for attorneys to discuss their cases with their clients. And this is, the court does a good job of keeping plaintiffs and defendants separated up there, but that confidentiality is really important. And it's a very scary place to be. So just kind of seeing those pictures and knowing that it doesn't look so scary in person, I think is helpful to anyone going through the process. Right, and like we talked about before, there are a lot of sort of the relief that's available through a PFA is quite like a menu, but the outcomes in PFA cases vary. And a lot of folks that we meet with at the beginning of the PFA process, again, think that they've received a lot of their information about the law from their abuser. And a lot of what is going to be the outcome of their family comes from the abuser's threats to them about what they tell them over time is going to continue to happen to them. So it's really important to have survivors get connected to attorneys and legal advocates, because it's the first time that they usually get some true and accurate information. And what they can see is that for their family, there are a number of possible outcomes in PFA cases that could work for them. And again, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing system for families out there. It's really tailored to meet the needs of their individual families and their individual circumstances. So the next two slides of mine talk about how battered women frequently present in court. We as advocates and attorneys see this all the time. And it's a highly emotional time for families as they go through the legal system. I believe that the clients I work with are extremely courageous to put their personal and confidential information out to complete strangers in order to try and protect themselves and their children. But they've been through a lot before they get to court. And a lot of times, they're overcome with emotion and they're minimizing the abuse. And judges in our legal system have to sort out and understand dynamics. And when I think back to some of the first slides that we talked about, that's really why it's important to have advocates and attorneys who are experts in this area of domestic violence and how it affects families, because we are the messengers of that information to the court a lot of the time, and that allows the court to have more information about the dynamics of domestic violence and maybe understand a person's behavior in court as they appear in front of them. So you can read through these examples on this slide and the next slide if you want to. But these are frequent and regular things that we do see in the court system. They are not unfamiliar to us, and hopefully as we continue to educate judges as they come onto the bench, they won't be so unfamiliar to them. That's part of the systems training that we do that I believe helps families who have survived violence go through the court. And then the next two slides are about how batterers frequently appear in court. Again, we do see a lot of this behavior. Oftentimes batterers appear very controlled and they appear very likable, and survivors sometimes don't always appear that way. And again, the court has to sort through those things. And the more we can do to educate the court about these dynamics, the more services we are doing for survivors. So you can see some examples: self-centered, narcissistic. They appear as the injured party, like, this is happening to them. We see a lot of batterers promising that it won't happen again, asking for a second chance, and also wanting to tell their story, which is sometimes and usually a one-sided story, right? They're not seeing it through the eyes of the whole perspective of what happened. They're seeing it through their own experience as the batterer and not wanting to be looked at badly in court. So what kind of abuse are we seeing in families in the legal department? We see a lot of technological abuse. Particularly, we've noticed this during the last few months under the pandemic. Abuse has been, contact between parties has increased through texting and social media. And we often see this ongoing control in text messages and what I would call veiled threats, where only the survivor understands what the threat is, whether it's to them or to their children. And if we can just go to the next screen, this is an example, a real example of text messages for a case that we worked on. And what I want to say to you is that, you think about every day texting with someone that you have a good relationship with, someone that you love. I know in my house, you know, if I'm texting with my husband, it's usually about who's making dinner and who's picking the kids up and whether we have homework to help with that night. When you start to get into text messaging where between an abuser and a survivor, and it looks like this. So, and nowhere in these example of text messages is there necessarily an outright threat, but it's all of the red marks are, you know, foul language, calling them terrible names, putting them down over simple things like getting a ride or picking up food or putting things away in the home. And you think about how, you know, perhaps what does that feel like for a survivor who has, you know, likely has children with this abuser over time, right? So I know there's a lot of times during the day where I have a moment to think about things. If I'm grocery shopping, a lot of us do grand thinking in the shower every morning, right? We come up with our best ideas. But when this is the type of constant communication that you're receiving from your abuser about simple everyday things, it's paralyzing and it's debilitating and it's degrading, and it makes it really difficult just to get through the day, right? To get through dinner, to get through getting your chores and errands done, to taking care of your kids. And I just think this is a really something we don't often think about as what survivors are navigating as they have left the relationship. It still remains really ugly. It can remain really ugly even after they're no longer an intact family anymore. So, excuse me, as part of PFAs in the court, there are a lot of custody decisions that need to be made with regard to the children. Excuse me, I apologize. So one of those things is how much contact does the abuser have with their children, right? And this is probably one of the scariest decisions that survivors have to have input on, right? Particularly because children want to love both of their parents, and they, in an ideal situation, they want both of their parents to remain together. A lot of survivors stay in relationships, we know, to protect their children, right? If they're there while their children are with the abusers, then they feel like they can keep their children safe. When they leave, they don't have that same type of protective ability over their children. And so they have to make decisions as part of court cases about what is that contact going to look like and how are their children going to be safe if they're with the other parent who has been abusive in the history of their relationship. You know, they're also navigating things like school locations and exchange locations. So if you leave a relationship, you know, if the law right now says that you have, and your children are in school, the law says you have to remain in that school district, right? Which it might be a financial obstacle, it might be a transportation obstacle. And if you are going to have to do custody exchanges, where are those going to occur? A lot of folks say, you know, I don't want to do it at a police station because it doesn't feel natural or a natural place to do an exchange. But if you start doing it somewhere else where it isn't lit up or, let's say, open, it can become dangerous. I'm sorry, I have a tickle in my throat. We also have to think about counseling and activities, and is the other parent going to be on board with those things? We have a lot of situations where both parents are allowed at activities, and when they're there, they cause trouble. And it makes something that's supposed to be enjoyable for children really unsafe and really uncomfortable. We go to the next slide. I'm so sorry about that. So what if children aren't abused themselves? We see this a lot, and it's a common misconception that unless children are abused themselves, they're unaffected by witnessing domestic violence. But we know that's not true. We know that children are sponges, and they're constantly picking up information that's happening around them. And we know that survivors are trying to one way they think they're trying to keep their children safe is to not talk about things in front of them. But they're picking up on things, and they know what's going on around the house. They know when their mom or their dad is upset. They know when a parent is think about that same parent that's experiencing those text messages. What does it look like when that parent's trying to take care of their own children? We also know that children hear yelling, they see things that we don't think that they do see. And we know that 80% to 90% of children living in homes with IPV are aware of the violence.
Sabrina.
You can do the next slide.
Children's
ability, I'm sorry.
Did you want me to jump in? Are you okay?
Yeah, no, I don't know why I got a tickle. I'm okay. If there's something you want to say, Carla, go ahead.
No, I just agree with you that a lot of people don't realize that because it is not the children aren't experiencing the physical abuse or the mental abuse, but they are witnessing and they are affected, and it affects them in school, it affects them in their relationships with their friends and socializing out with their friends. So yes, Sabrina, I absolutely agree that, Women's Center and Shelter, we look at our little people as survivors as well.
Right, and it's a really hard thing, I think, to prove in court, right? Because there is no direct evidence sometimes to show the effects that the abuse is having on the children. So, we have to be able to have survivors tell their whole story so that we can see how children are connected and intertwined with the abuse that's happening in the home, right? And you're right. It's hard because, kids think of school as their safe place. But when they're carrying this type of, family interaction with them every day, can they focus on their schooling? Can they create healthy relationships? That's all part of what's going on.
Yeah, the effects of it show up as stress and just high anxiety and not wanting to want to isolate themselves and not be around their friends.
Thank you, Carla, and for letting me get a breather.
Oh, no worries. So children, as Sabrina was saying, that children's ability to cope depends on a variety of factors. The nature of the trauma, the innate resiliency that this child may possess, and their flexibility, the age and where they are in their development, in their brain development, relationship to the abuser, because we know that it's hard for it's very confusing and hard for these children because more than likely, they love that dad or that mom, whoever is the abuser. And it's very confusing for them.
Right.
So their positive self-esteem, we may see that decrease prior to the trauma. It may be that they are just out, they love their friends, and they love being out in their groups and in their activities at school. But once they begin to witness that trauma in the home, all of that seems to decrease. So those are some of the signs for moms and our parents to look for when our children are also survivors.
Right. We do have plenty of clients that talk about over time how, as they have the longer time in between when they've left and where they are in their case, about how they see these amazing changes in their children by just not being in that situation anymore, right? Now, that competes with if there's still a fear of having time with that parent, right? And what you're saying, Carla, balancing their love for that parent that's abusive versus, their fear of being in that situation. But with regard to the being out of it, we see just reports of, more calmness, more engagement. And I think, we probably see that not only in our cases, but within the shelter and within the children's department.
Absolutely. And I love that our advocates in the shelter, the groups that are provided for them, the psychoeducation groups and the education around domestic violence, because the women themselves, they're not aware. If you can imagine, they're in survival mode. So they want to be able to, survive themselves, but not paying attention. They're thinking, well, my child didn't hear us arguing, or they were up in their bedroom. But our children know. I mean, our children are smart.
Right.
At every age.
Right. So thank you, Carla. That was really helpful too, to have both perspectives.
Absolutely.
So, we often talk about how domestic violence is sort of one of the things on someone's plate who is leaving that type of relationship. And in future trainings, you'll hear more about our immediate needs coordinators and all the work that they do to support survivors. But, these financial worries and concerns play a big role into how families separate and to how survivors feel that they can take care of their children. We have a lot of clients who are living in an intact relationship in a housing where maybe they can't afford to pay all the bills in that house, but they also don't have a place to go to leave. And they have to come up with plans for that. And that can be really difficult. And Women's Center works a lot with clients to provide housing options and to provide resources to support folks that are moving or relocating. But the actual act of finding a new place to live or maintaining a household without the income of the other person coming in is extremely difficult. If someone files for child or spousal support in our courts, there's a waiting time in place when you can get to a hearing, and you have to prepare for a 4 to 6 week time period of how are you going to cover the bills? How are you going to put food on the table? How are you going to get your children to school? If there was one car in your family and you don't have that car, what does that look like? If you have young children, or, we can even see this now with the circumstances with schooling, the way during COVID-19 with hybrid schooling and childcare, how do you maintain work and still take care of your children? So, when I'm talking to families about domestic violence, and we make sure that we have a PFA in place for them as one tool in their, toolbox of safety, these are really the solid and questions that are coming up about, that's great, I feel safer with that in place, but now what do I do about all these things for my family as I'm leaving this relationship? And it's a focus and a definite worry for survivors.
Yeah. And Sabrina, can I say, when you mentioned COVID-19, we're seeing a lot of our women in shelter who their length of stay is increased because they've lost their jobs due to the pandemic and, being laid off. A lot of our women, they are in the food and beverage industry. They're working in restaurants and waitresses. So we've seen a lot of women that become unemployed.
Right. And no, I agree. And that factors into a lot of the cases we're seeing where they might be living in a house where the rent is more on the reasonable side or the mortgage payment is more on the reasonable side. But if they're not working those amounts of hours or having even any of that income come in, what do they do? And they may not have family that they can move in with. I know with one survivor, we heard about how her child was on the autism spectrum, and all the services for that child came to that house, right? So it was where the child had done the best developmentally and what she was familiar with. And the mortgage was about $800, but she was in the service industry. So how does she, she was without work, then how does she balance all of that while trying to provide her child with the most safest, calmest place to grow and develop and still maintain these bills and get back to work as she needs? And that's a pretty common scenario for clients that we're working with.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So now that you have sat through our training, we certainly don't expect you to be an expert, but you might be a friend. So what do you do as a friend? So most of the time, it's just to be an encouraging ear and to be able to listen. And now you have information about resources that are available. And you can connect that friend who is reaching out to you to those resources, such as the Are You Safe app, Women's Center and Shelter, and encourage them to talk to someone in an agency like Women's Center and Shelter to get better information. Because like I said, a lot of the information that survivors have come directly from their abuser, and it is not helpful information about what their future might hold if they're going to separate or leave.
Absolutely. And just remember, please, we're not just a crisis shelter. We are a place that provides a wealth of services for women that may not be ready to come into shelter, but they may want counseling. They may want group support groups. They can reach out, as Sabrina said, to our legal department. There are so many ways to get connected and get help.
Agreed. And this is really important. It's you can't just tell someone to leave for all the reasons that we talked about. First and foremost, that it's dangerous, but if folks don't feel that they have a plan in place to support themselves and their children, they're not going to feel good or successful or safe about leaving that relationship. And remember that folks who are in abusive relationships, survivors, they just want the abuse to end. Like, if in a perfect world, they would like the abuse to end and for their family to move forward in a healthy relationship. So saying just leave, I think makes, sort of turns people off from talking to you and providing you with more information that may be helpful with you getting them to good resources like the Women's Center and Shelter.
Yeah.
I think that affects the level of trust someone might have, because it's not just walking out, getting your keys and getting in the car and walking out the door. There's so much that becomes part of that process of leaving that people need in place.
Yeah, and remember I said that it takes a woman can take a woman up to 7 times to leave that abusive relationship. So please just have compassion and just be a listening ear.
Yeah, don't give up on them, for sure.
Thank you both so much, Carla and Sabrina, for such a very enlightening presentation. We really appreciate everything. We're going to spend the rest of the time together today answering any questions you might have about domestic violence in families. I know we received some in the chat and privately as well. But first of all, before we do that, we want to remind you of the remainder of the month's schedule. So again, we are Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and we have 2 more DV and series, which is DV and Money, October 22nd, which is next Thursday, and then DV and Men, which is the last Thursday of the month, October 29th, and you can register for them online at wcspittsburgh.org/DVAM 2020, which stands for Domestic Violence Awareness Month 2020. This is where I get into my DJ mode. But so we can put that link in the chat as well for you to register. It is now my pleasure to introduce our Chief Development Officer, Kristen Brown, who will be leading our Q&A section. Kristen.
Hello, thank you, Nicole, and welcome to the Craig family. I was especially honored and blessed to know Shirley. I don't know that I'll ever know a sweeter woman than Shirley, so it's a pleasure to work with you all, and thank you for being with us today. Coincidentally, I actually got a message from a survivor while we were on this webinar, and she was our first survivor enrolled in our rapid rehousing program. And she just messaged me, and it was a picture of her and her little doggie. And she just said that she is feeling grateful and blessed, and that she just thanks us all so much for our support. So that was a nice little treat. And it just is a testament to everyone's support, of the shelter and of course the pet area, and just all of the support that we get. So we thank you. I think one of the things that sort of Carla mentioned, and it was in the chat, Nicole has talked about, I think most people know us as a shelter. And as Nicole reiterated in the chat, only about 6% of those that we serve are actually through our emergency shelter. And we serve a total of about 7,200 adults and children each year. Nicole, starting with you, do you want to just quickly talk about sort of the scope of the ways that we serve all in survivors and children in all sorts of different ways?
Right, absolutely, sure. So looking, as Kristen just said, looking just at the numbers, based on about 8,000, which is the number of adult and child survivors that we served last year, only 500 needed shelter, and about half of them were children. So when we're talking adults and taking that number, actually only 3% of our adult population of clients need shelter. So shelter plays an absolutely critical role for somebody who is at the intersection of being in a potentially lethal relationship, and that other part of that intersection is if they don't have resources to, for instance, have a full security system in place, or stay with somebody who has a security system, or perhaps go to a hotel in another county to get to safety. So somebody who is in such a dangerous situation that no matter where they go or what they do, they may be killed, or somebody who doesn't have the resources and is in a potentially lethal situation. You know, those are really the main folks who need shelter, and shelter is an absolutely critical function. But again, when we're talking numbers, it's really one of our it's hard to say, it's actually one of our smallest or smaller services, just when you're looking at flat out numbers. The remainder of folks really need our non-resident services, whether that means you know, any of the services that have been mentioned, our support groups, our therapy, our legal advocacy, our civil law project, immediate needs coordinator project, you know, CYF, which is our children, youth, and families program, medical advocacy, you know, any of those services. And so we really, what we say instead, you know, I just kind of went down a list, right? But what we have been saying is, wherever you are in a relationship, whether you're just determining that you may be in an abusive relationship and need help to even figure that out, or whether you are literally fleeing for your lives, we have a service and we have advocates who can help you get to whatever your goal is. So we serve people who don't want to leave the abusive relationship. They want the violence to stop. They want to be able to emotionally be able to deal with what's going on, but like, their immediate goal is not necessarily to leave, and that's okay. We still want to help you. We are not judging. We are not judgmental. We are not saying you're in an abusive relationship, you've got to get out. That is not at all what we're saying. We want to help you wherever you are in your relationship. So if it doesn't matter, the question in the chat was about if you need for the abuser to get out of the house because you own the house. Absolutely, that person should give us a call. Our hotline, as Carla mentioned, or text or chat, they are the first way in to our services. Besides, of course, if you're getting a protection from abuse order and going through the legal system, those are two of our main ways into services. Doesn't matter what your situation is. Doesn't matter what your goal right now is. If you are experiencing abuse or think you are, we want to be able to help. Sorry, long answer. Sorry about that.
Thanks,
I get
Nicole.
passionate.
No. We have another question in the chat. It's do you have resources for affordable housing for undocumented survivors? It's a huge barrier, and this question is for Christina. It's a huge barrier for some of the clients that she works with. So resources for affordable housing for undocumented survivors.
Yep. Who wants to take that? We do,
Yeah.
is the answer, but go ahead. Go ahead, Carla.
Yes, we absolutely do. Our advocates in shelter can work with each and every person that comes in, whether you're a refugee or immigrant. We have our real team, which is our refugee and immigrant limited English speaking, that we can coordinate with to help anyone be able to connect and get safe and affordable housing.
And that includes if you don't come into
And
shelter.
that includes if you do not come into shelter as well.
And I would just say on the legal side that option of filing for a PFA is available as well. And we talk with survivors who may fall into that category about what is safest for them over time, but filing for a PFA and getting representation by the Law Project is and connecting to legal advocates is absolutely available.
Right. Yep. All of our services are free and confidential to anyone, regardless of status.
Thank you all. Here's another question about how COVID-19 has affected your work. So first for Sabrina, how is, well, everything I know, but how has COVID-19 affected a victim's ability to get a PFA?
That's a great question. And when the pandemic hit in March, the court worked very diligently and quickly to set up a system so that folks could only have to be in the courthouse for a very minimal amount of time, which includes having, at some point in time, it was the attorneys from Neighborhood Legal Services and the Civil Law Project, and then transition to the 4 domestic violence agencies, legal advocates, filling out the petition over the phone with a survivor of violence. And then appearing before the judge remotely. So most of the courthouse remained closed for that time period, but the court understood the importance of still being able to get protective relief while the judicial emergencies were in place. And the system was developed in order to do that and to keep people safe. And there's been some really great things that have grown out of that. We're looking at perhaps a long-term remote filing system. We've had systems put in place that help with making service by our law enforcement more successful without having the victim having to go to the department to provide the papers there. They're being faxed. So all of those things happen. And then final hearings final PFA hearings, along with most of the court's other types of cases, are being done remotely with everyone appearing by Teams or over the telephone. So survivors are not having to come down to court. They're not having to find parking. They're not having to see their abuser. We can prepare with them to be on screen with them, but it's a little bit different than having to see them in person, which I think is safer. So I would just say this too. The other thing is we've noticed that the abuse has become more physical that we're seeing in PFA petitions because survivors are in the house for a long period of time without many other options of places to go. And when they were coming to court to get protective relief, it was a lot of physical violence that we saw happening that had increased. So that is not a good thing, but we do know that it was good that those services were still available there to help them seek safety.
And I'll add to that, that as one of the people in the organization that reviews all of the mandated reports that our staff have to make, I've seen a marked increase in the number of children and youth who have gotten involved in trying to defend typically their mom from the abuse, and who've either gotten hurt or just gotten very much involved and that's what resulted in the mandated report being made. So it's been pretty heartbreaking to see how our clients have been experiencing the increase in the severity and frequency of domestic violence during the pandemic.
Yes, for sure.
Right.
Take it away,
Kristen.
Nicole. Thank you all.
All right, we believe that was our last question. Thank you so much for that. So we have 2 more slides that we're going to go over very briefly and still end by noon. And the first is our ways to reach out. So I know we've already gone over this, so we'll flash this up briefly. We want to hear from you. If it's you that's in the situation, if it is a friend, a loved one, a neighbor, somebody you go to church with, somebody you see on Zoom meetings, a coworker, anybody can call our hotline or text or chat our hotline to help with the situation or to get support for yourself. You can always, of course, use our Are You Safe app as well, which has a lethality assessment in it and connections to domestic violence resources, not just Women's Center Shelter, but resources across the country. And that was an app that we developed with Aspirant several years ago. It's available not just in English, but in Nepali and in Spanish as well. So those are the different ways to reach out. And getting back into my DJ mode, if we can go to the next slide, please. We also have Domestic Violence Awareness Month, as we mentioned, 5 easy ways to show your support during DV Awareness Month. Of course, I would not be doing my job if we wouldn't start off by saying we would love for you to make a donation at WCScanhelp.org. Community support is really the only way that we're able to continue our services. We have a huge diversified funding base, including government, foundations, corporations, and everything, but individuals make up a huge amount of the donations that allow us to do our work. So thank you all, because so many of you are already donors. We so appreciate it. And we really appreciate any other help, of course. You could also donate a meal or items from our wish list. Our wish list is always updated and available on our website. And meals for our shelter specifically, and the moms and kids are so appreciated. Typically restaurant prepared meals during COVID, of course. A very easy step you can take is wear purple on October 22nd. Next Thursday, wear Purple Day. So we appreciate you doing that, and you can tag us in a post or anything that you'd like to do with that. You can compete in the Trivia or Treat virtual trivia night coming up on October 28th. Is that correct? Okay, it's not up there. I need my cheat sheet. October 28th. It'll be really fun. It's only $10. Whether you are awesome at trivia or stink at trivia like I do, please join. And then, of course, We would love for you to be able to share our posts, get educated about domestic violence, just like you've done today, and continue to do so. So we so appreciate you helping us to acknowledge Domestic Violence Awareness Month by being here and by doing any of those things, and mostly really just by helping a friend, right? Who help, tell them about our resources. So we know, just to wrap up, we know that this is a topic that we could talk about for hours. We really wanted to start to scratch the surface. In the future, we may look at a presentation on, for instance, changing family dynamics when somebody starts to leave a relationship, when a batterer starts to get help. How do those family dynamics change? How the dynamics change with your immediate family, for instance, when you find that you're in an abusive relationship. There's one of the things about domestic violence is it's so complex and layered. And so we really want to dive into those layers. So this was a great step in that direction. We so appreciate everybody being here. We really appreciate the people who hate to be thanked, which is Kristen and Jake and the development team, for putting this all together. So thank you so much. And huge thanks to Carla and to Sabrina for a wonderful presentation today. And thank you to all of you and to the Craig family. We miss your mom. We loved Shirley. We love Ted. Your family's amazing. And thank you for all your support. Have a great rest of the day, everybody. Thank you.